Guys, it's a spa weekend. It's time for the Belgian Grand Prix. Our sort of impromptu summer break is over. There's a lot to talk about, and we're going to be making our predictions for what's going to happen this weekend at the Belgian Grand Prix. After 3 weeks off, Formula One is finally back. We are basically at the midway point of this 2025 season, and so far it has been all papaya all the time. But that said, we still have a lot to pay attention to. There's been a lot of changes and things that have gone on over this few week break. Obviously, I think probably the biggest talking point is Red Bull letting go of Christian Horner. Going into the Belgian Grand Prix this weekend, we are going to be having our first Red Bull race weekend appearance without Christian Horner being the team principal. Gonna be an interesting weekend. I'm sure the team personnel and drivers are going to be having a lot of fun answering a lot of questions about what that's going to mean for the team. But other than that, it's gonna be a fun weekend. Spa, one of my favorite tracks on the calendar. I do think this current era and regulations don't necessarily lend itself to the best racing around Spa, but at the same time, it's one of the most famous racetracks in the entire world. It has some of a complex of corners that is probably the most famous complex of corners in the world. And I, for one, cannot wait to see these 2025 cars and drivers going full tilt around the hills of Belgium. I almost said Austria. Belgium. But guys, we're not here to talk about everything else. We're here to make our predictions for what's going to happen. We're going to be talking about our biggest positive surprise, our biggest disappointment, our Grand Prix qualifying for the race on Sunday. And because it is a sprint weekend, we'll be making a sprint winner prediction. Ooh, get excited. Sprint weekend back on the calendar, I guess, for another weekend. We'll then round things out with our race podium prediction, and then we'll end things off as we always do with our one crazy prediction. But guys, without further ado, let's go ahead and kick this thing off with our biggest positive surprise. Let's get this thing started with our biggest positive surprise. And for this Belgian Grand Prix weekend, I'm going with George Russell, who I think is primed for a very good weekend. Not only did George struggle a lot last time out at the British Grand Prix, making a bit of a tough strategy call that ultimately just didn't work out in his or Mercedes' favor over the course of the weekend. We're also coming back to the almost 1 year anniversary from George Russell's potentially one of the best drives we've seen him make before unfortunately he was ultimately disqualified from the Belgian Grand Prix last season for having a car that was underweight when it was all said and done. He absolutely shocked the entire grid, doing a surprise one-stop around Spa. Saying that again is just insane to me. He made a one-stop work around Spa, ended up finishing first on track before unfortunately having to relinquish the win to Lewis Hamilton, who finished in second and was looking like he was going to be well on his way to an easy win before George shocked the world and pulled off that one-stop. So I think we're going to see a bit of a bounce back from two fronts here from George, not only just from the disappointing British Grand Prix last time out a few weeks ago, but also from a very disappointing disqualification a year ago. Let's move on now to our pick for biggest disappointment, and we are going with the French outfit Alpine's Pierre Gasly. Not only did Pierre come home for a fantastic, I think it was P6 finish around Silverstone, absolutely catapulting himself up the order with a very, very good weekend. We now head to a track that I don't think is going to suit the Alpine very, very well, and I think it's only natural to expect the Alpine and Pierre to take a bit of a step back again. Alpine has been one of the more confusing teams on the grid so far this season. Obviously, Pierre has been there the entire time, but they also have all of the Franco Colapinto, Jack Doohan controversy and weirdness going around like that. There's also a lot of conversations about Franco's future in the team, and so I think there could just be a lot of distractions this weekend, and especially going to a track in a format in a sprint weekend where there's not going to have that much time to figure things out, and I think we could see Alpine struggle. So I'm sorry to say, Pierre, but for this weekend, you're my pick for biggest disappointment. All right, let's move on now to Grand Prix qualifying. This is the qualifying that will set the grid for the race on Sunday. We're not going to do sprint qualifying. It's a bit of a crapshoot, and honestly, it could be more exciting, but we have enough qualifying predictions as it is. So let's go ahead and begin with my pick for P3 this weekend around Spa, and I'm going with Lando Norris this weekend. I think McLaren still far and away the best car on the grid, and there's really no expectation for either McLaren driver to be qualifying outside of the top three. And so this weekend, I think we could see Lando take take a P3 here, and maybe not even from a mistake on his own. I think we could just see some special laps from those around him, especially considering this is the Grand Prix qualifying for Sunday, which will come after the sprint qualifying and the sprint race. So everyone is going to be pretty dialed in to the racetrack, to the conditions, and I think we're going to see the best out of a couple of people who I think just might put in a bit of a better lap at the right time. We've seen in the past on Lando sometimes has struggled to put the lap in when it matters most, and so while I think it'll still be plenty good enough to be in the top 3, I think it's only going to be P3 for Lando this weekend. As we move on to P2, I'm going with George Russell. Doubling down on my biggest positive surprise pick here, I think we could see a special moment for George. We've seen him have a couple of these this season, of these qualifying performances that just leaves you a little bit shocked in awe. We saw him qualify very, very well last time out in the British Grand Prix before ultimately making aforementioned strategy mistake. And so I think we could see George with a bit of revenge on his mind and going ahead and putting it on the front row, but probably not quite fast enough for pole position, because that position is going to be held by Oscar Piastri. I think it's been a little bit of time since we've seen a true, Oscar masterpiece, and really kind of looked like he was on the jump from the go on Friday. And so I think this could be the weekend, especially given it that it's a sprint weekend. He's going to have a sprint qualifying and sprint race to get dialed in. And we've seen that Oscar has shown this season that he has more than enough pace to take it to Lando in qualifying. Will that lead to a win? I don't know, but I think he's going to take pole position around Belgium, with George Russell joining him on the front row and Lando Norris rounding out the top 3. What do you think? All right, like we mentioned, it is a sprint race weekend. That means one practice session. That means sprint qualifying immediately on Friday, and then a sprint race first thing on Saturday morning. But who is going to be the winner of the sprint race this weekend? I gotta say, Spa sprint race still sounds like the worst idea I've ever heard, but hey, I don't get to set the calendar, unfortunately, or else we would be having a lot more races at a lot better tracks, I can tell you that. But without further ado, my pick for the winner of the sprint race is Lando Norris. I think Lando actually is going to jump out to a very strong start to the weekend. I think he's more equipped to getting out early and kind of, getting a good sprint qualifying and taking the sprint win potentially. And so I think you'll see Lando sort of start the weekend very, very well, and I think it will culminate on Saturday morning in a sprint win. Now, obviously, sprint is... I have my own thoughts on the sprint. I'm going to hold off on doing there, but I think Lando Norris takes the sprint this weekend. He has been on a bit of a roll lately. He has a lot of momentum. Obviously, won his home race last time out at the British Grand Prix, and so I think this is going to be one of those weekends where we see Lando continue with the momentum, but we'll see how it ends up, because as we know, the sprint race only gives you a maximum of 8 points. So I believe that would bring him level with Oscar on the championship, if not only separated by a point or 2 on either side. So it's going to get interesting to say the least, but I think Lando gets it done with our sprint winner. All right, here we are, the moment we've all been waiting for, the race podium, where the big points are handed out on Sunday and where we get to go the full distance and see who has what it takes to stand on top. Let's go ahead, let's kick things off in P3, bottom step of the podium. I'm going with George Russell this weekend. I do think George is going to have a very good qualifying. I do think George is going to run a very, very good race. Unfortunately, I think third might be just the maximum in their bag this weekend, unless we see rain, which obviously could, shake things up. I know the forecast is showing a lot of rain, and so really, who knows? I might just be backing the vibes pick here with George, but I think he's got what it takes. P3 and a bit of a revenge moment for George. I think we can make it happen, but let me know what you think on my pick for George Russell down in the comment section below. As we move on now to P2 in my race podium, I'm going with Lando Norris. Now, obviously, in my qualifying predictions, I put Lando third, and I think it is far-fetched to say that I would expect any other car to really be able to hold back Lando from finishing in the top 2. I think this is definitely between 2 very specific drivers for the win. We'll go ahead and mention it now. My winner for the Belgian Grand Prix is Oscar Piastri. And so I think this is going to be another very similar result to what we saw before, which is a potential wet weather race, potentially decided where we have both McLarens battling it out at the front, and it might come down to just how good of a start Lando Norris can get to battle away and potentially try and steal the win away from Oscar. but I think this is definitely one of those moments, especially if it's going to be wet, where starting at the front is going to be ever so much more important. And I think Oscar taking pole position in my predictions is going to make the key difference here. And so there we have it, my race podium: an Oscar Piastri win, a Lando Norris P2, and a George Russell P3. And as always, let's round this out with our one crazy prediction. And this actually is a stat that I had to look up just to validate that this was actually correct. But my one crazy prediction is that Lewis Hamilton will finish the race outside of the top 4 for the first time ever. Now, the caveat I have to give here is that DNFs do not count in this prediction. There's been plenty of instances of mechanical failure and contact DNFs in the past, but I think he will classify in this race, score points, and finish outside the top 4 for the first time in his career around Spa-Francorchamps. That was a stat that took me a minute to even Google, because it was unbelievable to me. I saw it and I just could not believe it when I was going back and looking through Lewis's results. Lewis obviously coming off of a very successful British Grand Prix, obviously not as successful as we would have wanted him to be, finishing just off the podium. But unfortunately for him, that came to the benefit of Nico Hülkenberg, so I don't think anyone else is too mad about it. I think we could see a bit of another moment. There's been a lot of talk about Lewis and Ferrari this week leading up to the Grand Prix weekend. And so it just could be one of those weekends where we see them take a bit of a step back. Spa feels like one of those tracks where it seems like they're either the GOATs or they're kind of off in no man's land. And it kind of feels like that's just sort of this year for Ferrari, where they'll compete pretty decently. But unfortunately, with less practice time and potential iffy weather and a car that does not suit the rain at all, I think it could be a long weekend for both Ferrari boys. But my one crazy prediction is that Lewis Hamilton finishes outside the top 4 and classifies before this weekend is over for the first time in his career. But guys, there we have it. My predictions for the 2025 Belgian Grand Prix. What do you make of my predictions? Let me know down in the comment section below. And if you made it this far into the video, I really appreciate the view. I hope you enjoyed the video and you are looking forward to Spa just as much as I am. If you also made it this far, go ahead and subscribe down below. We'd love to have you join our little community to chat not only all things, F1 and motorsport, but also do a little bit of sim racing on the side as well. But guys, we'll be back after the weekend is over to talk about what happened this weekend in Spa. And I, for one, can't wait to see it. It's one of my favorites, and I hope it's one of yours as well. Like I said, we'll be back after the weekend is over. I hope you guys enjoy the weekend just as much as I do. But until then, I'll see you guys in the next one.